And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here among such esteemed designers and people who I haven't seen for years and I have admired from afar for a long time. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you. I've put together a slideshow. I'm going to try and share it here. And you can let me know if it's reading okay.
It's coming up now.
Yeah, okay. I'm just at the, it's at the end there. So let me just, let me just do that again now. Just have to, sorry about that now. So it's just, it's lovely to come after Nicola actually, because Nicola's been very inspirational to me as an educator. And I've learned a lot from her sharing and Nicola's sharing, and our students have had the privilege of tapping into, and we've been showing some of Nicola's education videos as part of our sharing with the students. So it's lovely to come on after Nicola. I'd be a bit embarrassed to be showing some of the images because just to share with you, I'm an educator, as Antonia said. I'm working in initial teacher education. So that means in Ireland, in the Irish setting, that the teachers that teach children from age 5 to 12, they are primary teachers, what we would refer to as primary teachers. And these teachers are generalist teachers, and they're responsible for teaching all aspects of the curriculum. So I teach the art part to the students, but they are generalist teachers. So in a way, it offers an opportunity for many connections to be made. And that has always been my, I suppose, one of the things I think laterally, sometimes I think it's a curse because I see connections with absolutely everything. But as an educator, it can be a wonderful way to help students to understand and to make links right across the curriculum. So in just to touch back to continuity, stability in the midst of disruption, as Antonia had introduced earlier on, both Mario and Nicola had just kind of mentioned, and I think it's just lovely now because I have put in this image because it's part of my studies at the moment. And self-reflection, I think, and reflecting on the kind of life that you live and where you are in the world, and the many layers that you have within how you live and what you've inherited as well, your heritage. And we are made up of our experiences of our past and past generations, our culture, and the land we live in, and the air that we breathe, and the environment that we are surrounded by. And the image over on the right-hand side there is a layered image of various different self-portraits, some of them which were done online, looking at myself on Zoom, you know, so just kind of interesting to just to I suppose start there. And also in terms of lineage, I always thought when I was training as a fashion designer that was going to be my life and my future. And I came in a kind of a circuitous route to education. However, my mother and my grandmother were both involved in teacher education and worked in the primary setting for years. Of course, growing up, I always said, no way, I will never be an educator, but here I am years later. I work, as Antonia had said, in the Dublin City University, but I started out in fashion design, and having a look back at some of the layers that contribute to myself as an educator, I realise in hindsight that my approach to design has always had a kind of a conservation role, where I didn't really like to cut the fabric so much, rather I preferred to sculpt with it. So draping, we had a visiting lecturer, Janice Wainwright, who came to NCAD, and she really inspired me, and that kind of triggered for me my approach to design. And of course, nature has really always been something that, you know, wools have always appealed to me. Silks, natural materials have always appealed to me. And throughout some of my design choices, I would have used the inspiration of stones and rocks and patterns in stones on the beach as part of that. I've always liked to collaborate with other designers, which I did. Petra Nelson did some of the print work on some of these garments. But I know that in the along the journey, being a fashion designer at this particular juncture had really left me with a choice to either scale up and get mass produced, or get out, basically, in order to make a living. And I was always drawn to the sculpting and the three-dimensional aspect of creating form, and it wasn't such a big dramatic change for me to start developing sculpture, which I did through getting involved with felt making. And I actually came across Nicola Brown's work during that period. So fiber sculpture using sheep's wool, of course, is deeply connected to the Irish heritage and culture. I thought it might be nice to share this particular image, as I really would like to thank the Felt Makers Ireland, again, another very generous organisation who share their skills and encouragement and knowledge very generously with anybody who comes to become a member of Felt Makers Ireland. But this particular piece is by Carmen Garcia, and it's on exhibition at the moment in Sculpture in Context in the National Botanical Gardens. And I just thought it would be nice to include it, and maybe just to think, I know Lee had mentioned the powerful Ukrainian forum that was included people who were displaced from their homes. And this piece here is, I suppose, giving us the opportunity to respond, maybe just to take a moment to look at this art piece and see, what do we think? What does it say to us? And there's something very emotive about sheep's wool fibre. Mario was talking about the fleece. I loved that image of the fleece drying in the garden, and the smell. There's something very connected to our heritage with sheep's wool. So in this, I think that the artist has had an empathetic moment and thinking about our fellow people in Ukraine, and it's the coziness, and then the red, the intense exposed arteries and veins, the blood and the violence. And I think art has the power to touch people and to to really communicate with people in a way that is very emotive. And I think that's the power of what we can do with art and activism. I'm going to zip through these. These are some sculptures that I created as part of Sculpture in Context a number of years ago. They were quite large pieces. And I'll just mention that I was drawn to creating these kinds of forms inspired by nature, but also inspired by the healing power of nature. And it's called Spore Drip. I'll come back to this maybe a little bit later on. So this is all using the medium of felt. And these are other felt sculptures that are from around that period. So coming just to talk to you a bit more about education. Education for me is about making connections through making. So what are the kinds of thoughts that come into your mind when you're developing awareness for our environment, developing awareness for the materials that we're using, harnessing knowledge through play with materials. And I think that's really important, because a lot of the students that I deal with, they're very outcome oriented. They want everything to be perfect. They want to know how to do it specifically. And my approach in this that I'm talking to you about today is a process-led approach, where we don't know what the outcome is. And this can be very challenging, very difficult. But I always use the pedagogy of play as a starting point, because what do we know, what we might discover by just inventing or looking at something in our own way. Allowing for not knowing as part of the creative process, again, is really important. And as Nicola mentioned, putting the thing in the pot, you just don't know what you're going to get, maybe depending on the weather and the whatever balance of iron and so on. So that allowing for not knowing as part of the creative process is being really important. And not just for the creative process, but in life, not knowing. We're in a time of instability and disruption, but maybe having a certain acceptance that the not knowing is a part of life, and that is a really important part of process. And of course, looking and responding to the work of artists and designers. Can you hear me all right? Yeah. So student engagement, I'm just going to show you some images of the work that we do in the college, and just to give you an idea. Now, sustainability is something, I suppose it's a term that we use, and I thought it might be useful to just outline what the dictionary understanding of sustainability, the ability to be sustained, supported, upheld, or confirmed. And in environmental science, the quality of not being harmful to the environment or depleting natural resources, and thereby supporting long-term ecological balance. At the start of my journey as a PhD student, I started with the idea that this engagement with nature and art had an effect on one's well-being. And I look at that as part of an ecological balance that we really need. And something else that I think we really need is connectedness, which is why we're all here today. So I'm looking at art and nature as partly nature has the ability to sustain us. And then I love the way the play on the word sustainability to break it up into sustain and ability. So our ability to sustain ourselves and the planet. So why focus on sustainability in art education? Well, I believe that there's a lot to be learned from what nature can tell us. What we can learn from the fact that if we make artwork with nature, it is often ephemeral and not long lasting, unless you're Nicola Brown and you go to a lot of trouble to make sure that it's going to be permanent. But I think that this whole idea of sustaining the self through nature has evolved for me into seeing that the interconnectedness is infinite, and that it includes technology, for instance, that we're using today. So igniting inspiration for the next generation of artists and designers through our creative teachers. So these are just some of the examples of some quotes that I have. I suppose I've been doing a lot of reading as part of my studies, and I think some of these things are quite enlightening. So concerning children and young people, some place-based environmental art education practices encourage multisensory observations and the use of imagination. Direct environmental experiences and observations are seen to increase awareness of natural phenomena and invite sensitivity, joy of discovery, sense of wonder and amazement. And this quote is taken from a really inspiring educator, environmental art educator in Finland, Jurisku, and I'll put some notes on bibliography at the end of the presentation. So some of the exercises that we do as part of our work with students is to bring them outside, which is really, really important part of our work with them. Engaging with the outdoors, gathering materials that are local to us in the college. And for me at home, sometimes I forage in my local area and I bring the goods into college. I make ink out of elderberries that I harvest. I show students how to do it. And we use this ink for a drawing medium in college. So outdoor engagement, it's a sensory experience also. So drawing awareness to the senses when we're outdoors, creating a visual awareness by doing some drawing, or maybe collecting the materials or taking rubbings of textures and bark and so on when we're out there. Using some materials maybe for making paper. So we gather, maybe ask the students to bring in flowers or other kinds of plants from home into college, and we create paper, which in itself helps them to make connections with their understanding of where paper comes from, for instance. Sensory mapping, going on a walking journey, observing in silence, slowly taking in our environment. And this ability for our students to connect directly in the moment, taking a slightly slower pace, is so important, that we get this experience, that the student teachers have this experience, so that they can develop their own understanding and awareness for the benefits of what they might find out there. We come back into the classroom. Sometimes I work in parallel, again, exemplifying the not knowing. I'm not the sage on the stage with all the answers. And this is a way that we want our teachers to be in the classroom with children, to enable them to be the artists and the designers, so that they feel that they have the possibility of coming up with the answers. David Selby is an author and an activist. And I love this quote. He has developing a sense of oneness with nature is likely to translate into transformative action and transformed ways of being in the world. David Selby is saying here that by exposing children at a very young age to nature and not allowing them, but giving them the opportunity to connect with nature, that in itself is a stronger bond for creating activism in the future, that children will care about nature. They will have a direct sense of empathy and care for nature. Some of the other elements that we might, we work with all kind of plant materials in this particular program, and we look at nature and to learn from the pattern that nature provides. And also we're mindful in creating new pattern by deconstructing materials, sensing the texture, the smell, the repetition of using stalks and pine needles and petals and so on, drawing a sensitivity for an awareness for pattern in our environment. And I've included these because our students really, of all the exercises that we do, they really respond to this particular methodology. And we do engage a little bit in mindfulness before we start this process. And it's done really, sometimes they like to work in pairs or in groups or individually. We leave it open to them. But it's the process of the making that is really, really emphasized in this. And most students comment on how relaxed they feel at the end of such a process, and how time has somehow slowed down in the 2 hours in which they're working. And this is where I'm slightly cringing because we have here a simple eco print. Dare I call it such. It's just you know, this is the type of thing that we would hope that students would do out in schools, and there's a Japanese term, I don't know if you're familiar with it, hapazome. It's this term that is given. If you look up hapazome, you'll come across millions of these kinds of images. But it's showing children the very, very basic essence of what an eco print might look like. And we luckily our flower, that is almost our national flower, is a daffodil. They're very plentiful here in the springtime, and the color range that we can achieve from the daffodil, both as a flower, as a hapazome print, and as part of paper making, is quite beautiful. And in this instance, where you're also using a slice of tree bark as the base, which in itself brings another kind of element of texture. And as Nicola quite beautifully pointed out, in her own garden, being connected with the seasons and being able to exemplify, this is a pigment, this is how inks are made, this is where color comes from. Like, where do you think that our paint actually comes from? Because we're so detached from you know, the core of where our materials come from. And this is one of the things that I think is really important. We're also lucky that we are based, our college is based near the National Botanical Gardens, and I go up there and we gather materials from their skips. They let us in to gather materials from the glass houses, and we bring back all this amazing material and put it up all over the art studio, and the students come in, and all the other you know, the main body of students, they're wondering what kind of jungle has appeared in the last week. And my colleagues, I'm sure they get totally cheesed off with this ever-changing vista that comes with the art studio. But with this, we use these as materials, and sometimes the plant materials themselves can be leather-like. They can be really robust, they can be prickly, they can be very challenging to work with. And again, just having this ethos of not knowing and leaving it as an open-ended exploration. And what I absolutely love about this, in some ways, it's the challenge, and sometimes students get extremely annoyed and frustrated with something maybe not joining together. And we always equate this as a learning experience for our students. They go into lots of challenging situations in classrooms where things don't go right. But it's the element of chance and holding on to that power of observation to see what we can change along the way, what kinds of things, what kinds of new opportunities arise. And we sometimes have to let go of what we think we know and just be aware and look and learn how to see what is actually in front of us. And one of the other really important things that we engage with all the time as part of our pedagogy is a reflective process. And in this piece on the right-hand side, I had to include it because the student who created this artwork was so challenged and spent half the class trying to force the materials to do something that they didn't want to do. And then in about 20 minutes produced this piece. And the balance of it was the most beautiful. And there was a lot of pieces that again, tension and holding on the left hand side. You see there's actually two pieces of rod, then the leaves were sandwiched in between, and it was the tension of the pieces that offered the ability to hold the leaves. And in the delicate balance within these pieces, they went on exhibition, and then they of course were going to degrade as the weeks went on, which also becomes part of the artwork, and the notion that things change, and that ephemeral work is it's okay, you know, it's allowed. And again, I'm kind of laughing post Mario's beautiful presentation of all his looms. We come to very rudimentary looms that are created from branches and leaves and grasses and wildflowers and mushrooms and all the things that are available when we go foraging. But it is the basic idea of what it is to weave. It is the basic connection with what it is to wear a garment that has been produced at some far corner of the world. Sometimes we don't even know the place that our clothes have been originated. And we always use this opportunity, see how long it took you to weave this piece. Imagine doing that with finer thread. Imagine the length of time it would take to create a piece of cloth. Where do our clothes come from? And do we value the price of the garment that we're buying? How can it be produced for that price? So it's these very small connections that actually connect children's thinking with being active, in actively questioning and actively engaging and thinking about these things when they become the consumer, when they are the people who are making the choices, and they're the people who are going to be the designers, the artists of tomorrow, or the rulers, maybe the politicians of tomorrow. So reflection on these kinds of processes is what is really important for us. I've gone completely off piece and I forgot to put my timer on. How am I doing on time?
Well, we're slightly over. We're over
Okay.
by about 10 minutes. So it would be, this is really fabulous, very interesting and wonderful, Andrea. And maybe if you can just bring us to I'm sure you have a very nice conclusion ready for us.
I'm nearly there now. There's one piece that I wanted to share with you, and I suppose it's anchored me in my studies. And this image I took last year in Poole Park in County Galway, and I never saw these types of mushrooms before, and mushrooms have featured quite a bit in my observations. I love the surprise of mushrooms and how they just appear. But eco-psychology is an area of psychology I only came to through my studies. And there is a researcher, Stephen Kaplan and Rachel Kaplan. They wrote a book in the 1989, which is going back quite a while, but called The Experience of Nature, a psychological perspective. And they took the time in their studies to prove, I suppose, the restorative nature of being outdoors, the restorative capacity of nature for us as human beings. And I suppose, you know, if we were even looking at an image can be restorative, but actually being in the outdoors is one of the things that can really be important. And as Nicola has planted so many trees, I know she's surrounded by nature, but a lot of us are in urban settings, and the importance and a knowledge of knowing, you know, how important it is that we keep focus on what is really important in terms of our ability to keep living. Essentially, I'm coming back to the mushroom here, and I'm going to skip to the end then.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah. So just we're here at this Hope forum. We are sharing, and there is a lot of energy that is exchanged between all of us. And the mushroom, I would see this as we're like the mycelium, these roots that are branching out. Half the time you don't see them, and it's the fruiting body is, you know, every now and then the results of all of these things come up to show their beauty, but it's the constant work and the constant sharing and the inspiration that we have that feeds us, and hopefully the positivity will carry us to a better future. I'm finishing now. Sorry for going over. This is just a book that I have a chapter in with another colleague, and it's all about the integrating of the arts for education for social justice and sustainability. And these are other fantastic books which I've come across. I mentioned The Experience of Nature, Last Child in the Woods, Richard Louv, and more recently Losing Eden, Lucy Jones, an incredible book. Amazing. Fashionopolis, I think I told Antonia about this some time back, again, a wonderful book. And fashionrevolution.org, another amazing resource. Where are my clothes made? You know, drawing awareness to you know, the horrors that can happen in the fashion industry, and then what we can do about making better choices. Thank you so much.
And Andre, maybe we can put those, if you want, you can put those in the chat. You can put the names of those books or some.
Yeah, I have actually. I've just got a bibliography there. I'll copy them and put them in the chat. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, that was really amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing so much information with us, and for being very mindful and thoughtful in how you educate our next generation of educators. And it's so important. And you know, to have people, you know, one of the things I liked most about what you spoke about was the slow walk, the fact that everybody is, you know, outside and just being as slow as possible to really be able to bring in and to be, you know, seep through their pores the moment that they are in there and then for the environment and what's happening, if it's, you know, the wind, the sun, the air, everything. And I know, of course, Lee has been dean of an MFA textiles course at Parsons here in New York. And I'm sure Lee has come across the not knowing and the students who want it just perfect. I could see a smile coming to your face when Andre mentioned that, Lee.
Yeah, well, it's a struggle of all of us, I think. And whether you cook or whether you, whatever you do, this quest for perfection is pretty dire. So it was very good you mentioned it. And I think, you know, when I read your thoughts, that it's really so interesting that a next generation of kids is going to have this. I mean, I wish this would already be there for a much longer time. It's really very important, because this is going to, you know, from generation to generation of kids, and it's perfect to make them think this. It's really cool. And I think the kids will love to be taught like this also.
Yeah.
Then going to school is a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I could mention loads of things, but I mean, there's so many amazing things happening.
It was very clear what you said. It was really good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. It's been really enlightening.